Welcome into another Strictly Stripes offseason podcast edition as we continue our positional reviews. Muhammad Ahmad, Andrew Gillis, and Mike Nizick with you as we continue breaking down the defense, moving from the defensive line up to the linebackers. And this isn't the first time we've talked about the linebackers because, of course, we've talked about Jermaine Pratt, who's set to be a free agent this offseason. And we've all pretty much kind of agreed there's really only a 10-15% chance he comes back to Cincinnati, unless some miracle falls out of the sky. But of course, the question now is if he walks, which is the case, who would step up? That would likely be Akeem Davis-Gaither. He only played 22% of total snaps this past year, but he played in all 16 games, had a pick in the wild card game against the Ravens, had a nice fumble recovery. So for as little as he played, and I've said this, he's had a really significant impact. So guys, assuming a world where there's no Jermaine Pratt next year, how much do you expect Akeem Davis-Gaither to fill his shoes? And do you think there will be any drop off at all if he takes over?
Yeah, I mean, I think there has to be a drop off. You look at some of the numbers in terms of PFF grades. You kind of, I mean, just the eye test. Frankly, there's going to be a drop off if you lose Jermaine Pratt. In terms of linebackers, for total defensive rating on PFF, Jermaine Pratt was 11th. That was obviously the best linebacker on the Bengals. It's one of the best linebackers in the league. But I think the Bengals are kind of looking at Akeem Davis-Gaither as a one-for-one replacement. He's 6'2", 228. Jermaine Pratt, 6'2", 240. So they're pretty similar body types, similar height, weight, speed guys. They kind of like what they have with Logan Wilson, obviously. So you're not going to need to overhaul the linebacker position, but yeah, it's going to be a tough jump for Akeem Davis-Gaither. I don't think you can justify paying Jermaine Pratt when you've got Logan Wilson still on the horizon. If you want to pay him, he's going to take pretty significant money. So this feels like kind of the theme of this podcast all off season long. There's going to be tough decisions to make now or in the future, and this is one of them.
Yes, I don't think there will be a drop off. I think Akeem Davis-Gaither has the kind of the skill set, the athleticism, the range to step in. He's been in the system for 3 years. He shined as a backup or whenever the rare occasions they've used three linebackers. I don't think there's any reason why he can't step in and be just as good. Frankly, I mean, I think that, with his athleticism, there's not a lot of plays that he can't cover. He showed he's pretty good at coverage along with, Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt the last 2 years. And I think it's his time to shine. I think that it would be different. Are we just assuming Jermaine Pratt is gone? I think it'd be different if they didn't have an Akeem Davis-Gaither sort of waiting in the wings. I think that makes it sort of an easy decision here for this front office because they've got somebody I think that's really capable and ready to step in.
So, Andrew, what do you make of that? You said yourself you think it's going to be a little bit of a drop off. Do you think Mike makes a point there, or do you still think that it's just not going to be the same without Jermaine Pratt?
Oh, I mean, it depends. Like, I don't think it's reasonable to expect a guy to come in and play like Jermaine Pratt did. I thought Jermaine Pratt was really, really good. So I think, I mean, I don't think it's fair to just say I mean, during the season, you kind of have to say this type of thing. You hear from the players a lot. Well, it's next man up. You hear from the coaches and everything like that. I'm not sure that that's necessarily the case. I'm not saying that it's a Grand Canyon gap where you're like, I don't know what you're gonna get. But Akeem Davis-Gaither was nice in the moments that he played. You saw him play a lot against teams like the Ravens and the Falcons, teams that and the Browns, teams that like to run the ball a little bit when you take Mike Hilton off the field. So you're not throwing somebody in there who has no concept of an NFL game, a rookie, or somebody who's brand new to the system. So it's not going to be a huge drop off, but I think there will be one just because I was pretty high on what Jermaine Pratt did in 2022.
And there's already proof of concept. I mean, Jermaine was out against the Jets, and Akeem Davis-Gaither had one of the best games on the defense. I think if you look at that game, I think it was 15 tackles according to Pro Football Focus, 6 stops by himself. Did good in coverage, had a quarterback pressure. Maybe he doesn't play at that level, but I don't think there's nothing out there to suggest that he can't handle sort of what Jermaine did. I mean, he's sitting on the bench because they've had two starters and they haven't had to use them. It didn't. I don't think it's necessarily a sort of a criticism of his talent. I think he's ready.
I think, I'm leaning more towards Mike because I think I said this after they didn't beat the Browns. They lost to the Browns, and I think they should have beaten them. And that was the game where he had that fumble recovery, even though he only played like 7 snaps. Like I said, it just seems like no matter how much he played, you could rely on him. And it's even more impressive because he didn't even play the back half of the 2021 season. He had a season-ending foot injury, so he didn't even play in that Super Bowl run. This was his first postseason as an NFL player. So, he really showed what he was capable of had he played more reps the year before. And then kind of going to Logan Wilson, who was pretty much the green dot most of the year for the Bengals defense. We've talked about whether or not he gets an extension. We've already kind of discussed that. I still think it's up in the air, but nonetheless, it's a contract year for him. In a way, could you kind of imagine, Logan Wilson being like where Jermaine Pratt is right now, obviously? Like, do you kind of see that being Logan Wilson next year? And I guess, how much do you think he's going to bank on this year to get a big deal next year if he doesn't get extended this offseason?
I don't know what they're going to do with Logan Wilson. I mean, they really like Logan Wilson. He'd be a contract of 10 million, upwards of 10 million a year. I think it'd be hard to reboot the whole linebacker room next year, but I mean, obviously, you have to do something here. What they did last time, use that whole, the back half of that 2020 draft class to sort of firm up their future at linebacker. Right now, they have a lot of more needs, and I don't think they could spend 3 picks this year on linebackers to sort of manage the next 2 years. But it's a lot of money for a linebacker in a system that doesn't. They value linebackers, but not as much as the guys in the secondary or pass rushers or guys that can disrupt up front. So I think it's a tough sort of decision. This is not a defense where you sort of. I mean, they're on the books for $7 million next year at linebacker, and that's the most that they've spent on linebacker the last 3 years. They've been at the bottom essentially two or three teams in the league in that position. So I don't know what they're going to do there. I think it's a tough call.
Yeah, and Mike kind of alluded to it a little bit. It's the linebacker position as a whole. I mean, it's a bigger philosophical question, I think, than just a Logan Wilson question or a Jermaine Pratt question. Because when you kind of look at linebacker, there's a lot of smart people who kind of say, well, not sure linebacker matters a whole hell of a lot. Like, you can kind of look at linebacker a little bit like you look at running back on offense. Maybe not to that extreme, but like Mike said, if you were kind of ranking positional importance and where you want to spend your money, you want to spend it on the pass rush and on defending the pass. And I know linebackers can do both of those things, but you'd much rather have resources, draft picks, money going into your defensive line, going into your secondary. Just like on offense, you want to have it going into, you want to have it going into your passing game. And you look at the money like that is kind of being shelled around. Like, Roquan Smith signed a $100 million contract. Fred Warner almost had $100 million. Like, Shaq Leonard almost $100 million. Like, if you're gonna pay a top of the market guy, that's what you're paying. But even that next tier is like a $50 million contract. I don't know if you're willing to do that, even as much as, like
Yeah.
Mike said, you do really like Logan Wilson. I don't know if you're willing to do that. I don't know if you can do that just because of the money that you're going to be kind of capped, or you're going to be, not, no pun intended, the cap you're going to have on how much money that you can spend on guys, but also if you want to make that investment in that particular position.
Well, and one thing they don't spend money. I mean, they don't run the linebackers in Lou Anarumo systems are very they don't rush the passer very much. They're not used on blitzes very much.
Right.
He uses the kind of the nickel corner and some of the guys in the secondary, and they're not lined up on really on the line like an outside linebacker type to rush it. So that I think lowers their sort of value in that system, or what they're worth, because a lot of those top guys can rush the quarterback or are called on to rush the quarterback more.
Yeah, I mean they run a more of a 5-2 system, so it's not like they play, 3 or 4 linebackers like other teams do. There were times where maybe they played the 4-3 like when they had sub packages, but that usually wasn't the case. But again though, like it's just going to be really hard because let's assume Logan Wilson is a top 10 linebacker in the league next season. Top 5, I think it's a little bit of a stretch, but I think he makes a case for being a top 10 next year. Well, if that's the case, good luck paying his market value. I mean, 10 million is a lot, and if he plays even better, then good luck paying even more than that. Like
Well,
it's
his market
it's gonna be
value
tough
would be more than 10. That's the thing. Like
per year,
his,
per year,
well, yeah, it would be more than 10 per year. Like
right?
considering the guys that are going to sign this season and some of the guys that are going to sign next season, like, I mean, you're probably talking like 14, $15 million a year. So it's more than 10. It's a significant chunk of change to pay a guy like that.
Exactly, and that's just gonna be it's gonna be interesting to see, especially when it comes to the extension talk. But when we come back, we're gonna talk more about other free agents in the Bengals linebacking room, along with what the rest of the room will look like, not just next year, but in the years to come. Plus, much, much more right here on the Strictly Stripes podcast. Hey there, it's Muhammad Ahmad from the Strictly Stripes podcast. You might be wondering, what exactly is Cincinnati Football Insider? Well, it's a community of fans who want the inside scoop on the Bengals and a direct connection to the Strictly Stripes podcast and the reporters who cover the team, and that would be me, Andrew Gillis, and Mike Nizick. It works like this. Andrew, Mike, and I will text your phone a few times a day with breaking news, analysis, and our insights on the Bengals. It's the inside scoop on what we're hearing, and we'll give you the inside word before it even hits social media. Being an insider is the best way to participate with the podcast and get in on special events and Zoom calls with me, Mike, and Andrew. And the best part is you can text us directly. It's a great way to cut through the clutter of Facebook, Twitter, other social media, and avoid the trolls for just $4.99 a month. Still not sure? Well, just try it for 2 weeks, and if you don't like it, you can text the word STOP at any time, but you won't want to cancel once you join the community of hardcore Bengals fans. Here's the best way to get on board. Go to cleveland.com/Bengals, click on the blue banner at the top of the page, or if it's easier, text 513-940-4193. It's a great time to try the 2 weeks free, as we'll be reporting live from the NFL Combine in Indianapolis. Plus, we'll be covering free agency on the way to the NFL Draft in April. Give us a try for 2 weeks and see what you think. Just text this number again. It's 513-940-4193 and become an insider today. And thanks for staying with us on the Strictly Stripes podcast. So, believe it or not, Jermaine Pratt's not the only free agent linebacker in that room. Clay Johnston and Joe Bacci, who granted have mostly played on special teams, both set to hit free agency. Bacci is a little bit interesting because he's a restricted free agent, but it doesn't really matter much because as long as the Bengals keep him for cheap, which I think is going to be the case anyway, they keep him. And of course, like you said, you already have Akeem Davis-Gaither. You still got Logan Wilson, and we'll get to Marcus Bailey in a second. But again, we're talking in a world where there's no Jermaine Pratt. Like, do you see Clay Johnston and Joe Bacci maybe having a different role at linebacker, or do you just keep them on special teams and having the impact that they had? Because Johnston, I think, was actually pretty good on special teams. Maybe not as good as Bailey, who I'll get to, but I mean, does anything change for Johnston or Bacci?
No.
Well, I mean, they'd have to bring him back first.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do they? Do they?
I mean, they might. I mean, it depends. I mean, they're special teams players mostly. You know, does Joe Bacci want a larger role somewhere? I mean, maybe he's more of a straight backup this year with Jermaine Pratt gone. But I mean, he's a guy that I could see kicking the tires on trying to find a bigger role somewhere else. In terms of Clay Johnston, I could see him coming back because kind of a good special teams player that probably wouldn't cost him much money, but I don't know that he'd necessarily figure into the Zepp conversation at linebacker.
Right. And I think really we talked about like, is ADG the next Jermaine Pratt? I think Marcus Bailey is going to become what Akeem Davis-Gaither was this year. I mean, he has played in sub packages. He even played in the Super Bowl last year, and he played in the Ravens game. And he was actually a big reason why Sam Hubbard returned that touchdown, because he blocked off Mark Andrews to, let Hubbard get clear. I think that's somebody you can rely on in that sense. I mean, his pass rush grade was an 80 on PFF. He's only had 40 tackles in the last 2 years, but I mean, again, given the few reps he's had, I think that's not bad. Do you think it's time to give Marcus Bailey, more reps outside of just being a Pro Bowl caliber special teamer?
Well, I think, I mean, there's not really going to be a place for him, because if you're gonna stay in the look that you kind of stayed in your base, I guess you could say, you got three DBs or three corners on the field, assuming Awuzie, Cam Taylor-Britt, and Hilton. You got your two safeties, you got your four down linemen, two linebackers. So you're going to play Akeem Davis-Gaither and Logan Wilson. So, I mean, somebody would have to get hurt or, kind of like I mentioned earlier, you would have to play the Ravens or a team that, is really kind of set on running the ball. I think where you're going to see the Bengals add at the linebacker position is later in the draft and kind of maybe on the fringes of free agency towards the end, because special teamers are one of those things where it's a little bit like insurance. You don't really think about it until you absolutely need it. And then you're like, oh God, we're screwed. You really need some depth there. So, you really want guys that can play special teams, because it's not just physically, it's a mental thing too. And if you can fit those guys in at a reasonable fit, then yeah, but that's kind of where their main roles are going to be.
As far as free agency goes, to kind of wrap up with this, and even the draft, like you mentioned, if they go late in the draft, I mean, are there any names that stick out to you, either in free agency and or in the draft to you, Andrew?
Well, late is a little bit, kind of a crapshoot. There's a few names that you can kind of look at in the middle rounds. There's a kid from Cincinnati, Ivan Pace Jr.
There you go.
People kind of like him. Dorian Williams played at Tulane. Tulane kind of drew some obviously eyeballs later in the season when they beat USC. Their defense was pretty strong. He kind of made a name for himself in kind of his rangy speed, and I think speed is kind of what I'd be looking for if I were the Bengals on defense. You can do a lot, you can mask a lot with speed. That's why I like Trenton Simpson out of Clemson. Kind of the same deal, really athletic player. But it feels like a consensus at the best linebacker in the class. This kind of feels like somebody the Bengals would have to either take at 28 or trade back early in the second round and take, which, I mean, I'm always in favor of trading back. Drew Sanders, linebacker out of Arkansas. He's a big body. I believe he's 6'5", so you can really kind of use him in a lot of different ways. He really takes up a lot of space. He was, all SEC. He's a really smart football player. There's things you can do with Drew, considering he's pretty athletic. He's a multi-sport guy. So I kind of looked at him and I watched him a little bit, and I was like, he might be the Logan Wilson replacement if you want to draft a guy and move somebody over. Because that green dot, I mean, it doesn't always have to be a linebacker. You can have a Von Bell take the green dot if need be. You can move it around a little bit. So there's a few guys there, but I really think you're going to see maybe a mid to late round pick that the Bengals use on a linebacker.
I think as far as free agency goes, just a few quick names. Alex Singleton played with Denver and Philadelphia the last couple of years. Sione Takitaki, who played in Cleveland, he's a free agent. If you're looking at the really, really cheap guys, maybe even AJ Klein, who's a little bit more on the veteran side, if you want to get those guys in for cheap, that's a possibility. But again, I think either of those names, Andrew, could work because they'd be just as cheap, if not cheaper. But that is all the time we have today. We're going to continue our positional reviews on Wednesday with the cornerbacks. And of course, we're going to get to the safeties and more on the defensive side later this week. But we appreciate you all tuning in. Once again, for myself, Andrew Gillis, and Mike Nizick, I'm Muhammad Ahmad. Catch you Wednesday.